Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust you had a great weekend. We certainly had a very active one. I thank Frank Matzat, in fact, the CEO of Trademark East Africa, for a very insightful Mindspeak. The presentation was called Unleashing the East African Lion, and had some very interesting points. I'll put up a photograph of an economic density map of the EAC, and he also said that Tanzania has a trade surplus with Kenya, which I thought was interesting as well. We are editing the presentation and we'll post it to the suite probably on about Wednesday. I'd like to thank Bonnie Tunya for the interview this morning on CNBC. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups already. And my macro thoughts go back to Druckenmiller. As a macro investor, my job for 30 years was to anticipate changes in the economic trends that were not expected by others and therefore not yet reflected in securities prices. I certainly made my share of mistakes over the years, but I was fortunate enough to make outsized gains a number of times when we had different views from various central banks. The dollar, as I said on the 25th of August, when I said it's been punching higher, if things tip big, the dollar might soar. Meaningful broad-based rally, that was 1st of September, and then the 29th of September I got rather aggressive, and I said the point I'm making is that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks. Home thoughts. I like these quotes from Hunter S. Thompson again. The hoofbeats rang through the town like pistol shots. We'd be fools not to ride the strange torpedo all the way to the end. I took this photograph on Saturday evening as the moon rose above Nairobi. I'll put that up. And very much enjoyed myself. I was sort of made a waiter for a function for Save the Children and had a great deal of fun with that. And I also like this photograph of the moon kissing the ocean. Joe Biden sees less than even chance of nuclear deal with Iran. It's frozen the program. It's given us a shot for a peaceful solution. I tell you, I think it's a less than even shot, but it's a shot nevertheless. Biden said that while the United States and Israel have tactical disagreements, Washington remained fully dedicated to Israel's security. We will not let Iran acquire a nuclear weapon, period, he said. End of discussion. Not on our watch. And the issue for Iran is that brinkmanship does not favor Iran. One, because of the extraordinary pressure placed on the currency by the weaker oil price. That pressure's, I think, 7 billion or whatever relief they've had is not sufficient. So that pressure builds in this 6-7 month period of extension. And ultimately, I think, their best shot was with President Obama. It is not with Hillary Clinton, in my view. The EU blocks Turkey. Turkey looks east. That's Eurasian integration on the move. Washington has tried very hard to create a new Berlin Wall from the Baltics to the Black Sea to isolate Russia. Now comes yet another Putin judo chess counterpunch, which the opponent never saw coming, and exactly across the Black Sea. A key Turkish strategic imperative is to configure itself as the indispensable energy crossroads from east to west, transiting everything from Iraqi oil to Caspian Sea gas. Oil from Azerbaijan already transits Turkey via the Bill Clinton-Brzezinski-propelled BTC, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. So what Putin's move has accomplished is to have stupid EU sanctions once again hurt the EU. The German economy is already hurting badly because of lost Russia business. For the moment, let's appreciate the magnitude of the geopolitical shockwaves. There will be more when we least expect them. I think Putin has been very effectively kneecapped in point of fact, and I think Pepper is misreading the depth and the sheer volume of pressure that's being placed on Putin. Israel strikes near Damascus, Syrian state television said on Sunday that Israeli jets have bombed near Damascus International Airport and the town of Dimas, near the border with Lebanon. Israel has struck Syria several times since the start of the 3-year conflict, mostly destroying weaponry such as missiles that Israeli officials said were destined for their longtime foe Hezbollah in neighboring Lebanon. The Israeli enemy committed aggression against Syria by targeting 2 safe areas in Damascus province, in all of Dimas and near the Damascus International Airport. I remember once having an employee who was an ex-Marine, and he sat for me in New York, and this was at the time when Gaddafi got bombed by President Reagan, I think it was, and I remember asking Pat Doyle, and I said, or was it Clinton? I can't remember. But we're talking about sort of 95, 96, 97. And I said to Pat, what's the reason behind it? And he said, Ali Khan, because we can. And I think in Israel's case, it's very much because they can. Euro 122.87. The euro retreated 1.4% last week. Dollar index 89.35. Japanese yen 121.50. These are highs for the dollar. Levels not seen since July 2007. Swissy 0.9786, pound 155.65, Aussie 0.8292, and touched 0.8276, which is the lowest since July 2010. India rupee 61.958, South Korean won 11.2140, Rial 258.93, Egyptian pound 714.82. South African Rand 1136.66. My target is 12. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is set for its highest close since March 2009. Dollar has jumped 12% in the past 6 months and is the best performer of 10 developed nation currencies that Bloomberg track. Chinese imports fell 6.7%. Exports rose 4.7% from a year earlier, but that was less than the forecast for growth of 8%. So Chinese economy beginning to look softer. Well, it has been for a while. Dollar index 89.35 last. My target is a lot higher. 321,000 advance in US payrolls in November exceeded the most optimistic projection in a Bloomberg survey of economists, and I think we're just one massive number away from a rate hike out of the Fed. Euro dollar 122.87. I'll put up a 3-month chart. My target is 1 in 2015. California's hot drought ranks worst in at least 1,200 years. Higher temperature, increased evaporation help deplete reservoirs and groundwater. California heat this year is like nothing ever seen in modern temperature records. I'll put up a chart and you can see what I'm talking about. And, this global warming story is not going away, is it? Global spending on digital advertising is forecast to increase 15% next year, buoyed by mobile and social media campaigns projected to equal outlays for television by 2019. Next year, if you do the math, almost all the growth is from mobile. Commodity markets, just for a contrast, the Bloomberg Spot Index is up 12% since June, while the Bloomberg Commodity Index has slumped 17% over the same period. Gold rebounded well, got back above 1,200, but I don't see it a buy above 1,200. I think it's a big sell. Crude oil, last time I checked, $64.96. This is WTI. I believe we're going lower still. WTI for January dropped 97 cents to 65.84. It's lower still, but this was the lowest settlement since July 29, 2009. Markets responding to a double whammy of Saudi pressure. The market was still feeling the after effects of the OPEC meeting And then the Saudis dropped the hammer with their $2 cut in the OSP. This will take several days to play out, and we still have to see how their rivals respond. I'll put up a 6-month chart as well, and refer you back to what I wrote on the 1st of December, which I said US emerges as the new price setter for the oil market. Meeting in Vienna merely confirmed that the US has wrestled control of the oil markets. President Obama, while getting creamed in the midterms, has been a very subtle, skilled and hard-nosed exponent of currency and now oil warfare. This plan to undercut oil was exquisitely constructed and executed. I called it a very 21st century shock and awe, without even having to fire a bullet. I said the oil price collapse marks a major inflection point. The global consumer is back. And then I saw an article on global research, the engineered decline in oil prices, economic warfare. That is, the use of the price of oil as a highly effective weapon of economic warfare in order to force Russia and associate resisting regimes like Iran and Venezuela to submit or face a possibly severe economic recession, which could very well lead to velvet revolutions in all these countries and possibly to regime changes. Might go back to that piece I wrote on the 13th of October, Who Kneecapped Oil. And I took us back to Don Elon, who said America's new energy posture allows us to engage from a position of greater strength. Increasing US energy supplies act as a cushion that helps reduce our vulnerability to global supply disruptions and price shocks. It also affords us a stronger hand in pursuing and implementing our international security goals. I call the US administration psycho and the price slasher. And I said then that the new price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects and will place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. Interesting article in the Mail and Guardian saying that talking about farm gate prices in Africa for spices such as pepper, cloves, turmeric, chilies and ginger. Over the past few years, rising demand from an increasingly consumerist middle class in Asia has pushed prices through the roof. Black pepper, for example, reached an all-time high in June, currently trading around $9 per kilogram, up from $2 per kilogram a decade ago. White pepper has seen a threefold rise from $4 to $13 per kilogram. Ratio of global pepper stockpiles to consumption now stands at less than 10%, down from 75% in 2004, according to this report by Bloomberg. Extremely interesting. Olafur Eliasson has an exhibition at the Fondation Louis Vuitton, and the FT has a very interesting interview with him, and I've linked it on Rich Wrap-Ups. Works including Map for Unthought Thoughts, a 5-fold symmetrically patterned immersive light and mirror installation, Double Infinity, a corridor lined with blackened sandpaper, and a rooftop sun tracker directing rays into Frank Gehry's building. And it's very interesting. I was already very interested in artists of the West Coast, James Turrell, Robert Irwin. The new sensitivity, we were not even against money, it was just part of the equation. We didn't even have a critique against the market. And I like this panorama, rainbow panorama, and this second installation, which I'll put up as well. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, Congo's Kabila names new government in bid to broaden political base. The government announced on state television bringing members of 2 opposition parties to key posts, including Thomas Luhaka, the Secretary General for the Movement for the Liberation of Congo. He will serve as one of 3 vice prime ministers. Kabila elevated to the same role his ally Evariste Boshab, Secretary General of his People's Party for Reconstruction and Democracy. Boshab has pushed for a constitutional amendment to allow Kabila to run for a 3rd term. Some analysts say the government could weaken an already fractured opposition which has been led for decades by Etienne Tshisekedi's Union for democracy and social progress. The big question is whether this is part of a larger strategy of delaying elections. This is Jason's stance. Everyone who is in this new government has a vested interest in staying in government as long as possible. Renamo, protesting over the Mozambique election result being rejected by the court, said it continues to reject the official result of October's election after the country's constitutional court dismissed its complaints about the outcome. The Mozambican National Resistance, or Renamo, wants a caretaker government to be formed. Dhlakama is holding rallies around the country to build support for the party's demands. Because we have responsibilities over this country, we cannot look on impassively and serenely, Muchanga said. Renamo seeks a serious dialogue which will culminate in a compromise over the future of the country. Renamo wasn't surprised by the court's ruling. Renamo leader flies to Maputo on deck 9 to hold a rally in the capital. Renamo's campaign for an interim government amounts to anarchy, said the outgoing President Amande Guebuza. And this is what they retorted. The leader of the second largest party is not the leader of Renamo, it is someone else. It might be Nyusi. Put up a photograph of Pemba in Mozambique that took from the sky. Kobo 3 has written a very interesting piece. The evil genius of Shabab, Boko and other jihadists. They've found a way to kill Africa as we know it. If you want to take most of West Africa, all you have to do is collapse Nigeria. And if you then take Libya too, you can squeeze the nations of Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso in between to death and put yourself at the border of Tunisia and Algeria. Ethiopia will be the biggest stumbling block in the east to the carving of a caliphate. They are a hardy people, and at over 90 million, Africa's second largest population, just a little bigger than Egypt, and that is why Egypt is important. If it falls, it allows for an easy march in what will be highly sympathetic Sudan, and then into both South Sudan and Ethiopia. And because the historical Ethiopian enemy Somalia will be too eager to join in a war against Ethiopia, it will be surrounded on all its borders and easier to overcome. In theory, nothing else. And that is where Kenya fits in. Taking Kenya places you on Ethiopia's southern border. And countries like Uganda will fall like dominoes with their vital trading link through Kenya cut off. IS has been wise to leave the rest of Africa out of its scheme. For starters, the number of Muslims in these countries is relatively small. But second, a bridge of countries that cut across the continent from Angola, Zimbabwe to Mozambique protects the lower middle of Africa. These countries have a history of resistance against European colonialists and have once battle-hardened armies that can still brush the rust off and form a formidable front. Other countries, like Ethiopia and Uganda, too have the same tradition, but they are isolated and cannot form a long networked defense line. So bring down Nigeria, Libya, Egypt and Kenya, and Africa is yours. It is audacious and sounds like fantasy, but it is hugely tempting. And the fruits of doing that will be massive for the jihadists. Mad and murderous they might be, but stupid they are not. The Somalian Prime Minister Abdi Weli Sheikh Ahmed was removed from office by a no-confidence vote after a dispute with the President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed over cabinet appointments. The no-confidence vote was backed by 153 lawmakers, 80 voting against. The relationship between the two deteriorated when the Prime Minister ordered the Justice Minister Farah Abdul Qadir, a key ally of the President, to switch positions with Veterinary Animal Husbandry Minister Salim Alioy Ibrahim. South African all shares still below 50,000, but up 7.0261 this year. Dollar rand 11.3889. My target is 12. It's at a 6-year low against the dollar. Egyptian pound barely moving. Egyptian stock markets bounced 0.79% yesterday, and it's back to being up 40.563% year to date. And just 2.833% below a multi-year high reached on September the 30th. Nigerian oil share down 19.6012% at 19-month lows. though it eked out a small gain on Friday. The overnight rate has jumped to 30% from 12%, and that signals how much pressure the Naira is under. My target for the Naira is 200. It closed at 180.1 to the dollar on Friday. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 7.226% year to date, and this is a 17-week high. Interesting piece in Reuters how African insurers in vogue as incomes rise, talking about the activity that we've seen in this sector. Swiss Re, Prudential, Sanlam, all buying insurers in Africa. And somebody saying every insurer that you look at has probably about 5 or 6 suitors. A Standard Bank report published in August said that while the size of the middle class in sub-Saharan Africa may have been overstated in some studies, growth rates were nevertheless dramatic. In a study of 11 sub-Saharan economies, Standard Bank concluded the middle class had risen from 4.6 million to 15 million since 2000 and would be over 40 million by 2030, with Nigeria leading the way. Insurance penetration or premiums, written as a percentage of GDP, was 11.5% in Britain in 2013, but just 0.6% in Nigeria. For life insurance, penetration was 8.8% versus 0.2%, so you can see it's getting them all excited. Coming to Kenya, the big news was that the ICC dropped its crimes against humanity case against Uhuru Kenyatta. Kenyatta said at a business event in Nairobi, 1 down, 2 to go. And my piece over the weekend was that insecurity remains our Achilles heel as the ICC folds its case. The news that the ICC has withdrawn charges against President Uhuru Kenyatta had been expected, and at least by me, since Friday, July the 19th, 2013, when I wrote that the case against the president is crumbling like a stale biscuit. The markets had long ago looked through the interference that the ICC presented and discounted it as a non-event. The Nairobi All-Share Index struck a record high Thursday and Friday last week and has now posted a 21.8% year-to-date return. The All-Share entered a bull market in June 2012 and has since remained relentlessly bullish. It has rallied 155.2% over the last 3 years, which is remarkable when you consider the curveballs it has had to deal with. Last month, Kenya and Estonia were the best frontier markets worldwide. The All-Share has been lifted to new highs recently by its 2 big hitters, Safaricom and EAPL. Safaricom surged a further 1.7% on Friday to set a fresh record high of 1480 and has rallied 19.3% since releasing first half earnings on November the 4th, and has been a key catalyst in the all-shares surge. The reaction higher since the earnings release is testament to how far Safaricom beat earnings estimates. Its move to pipe 4G into homes is now set to spike data spending big, and the price is set to slice through 15 as early as next week. EABL has been another key precipitator of the bull move in the Nairobi all-share. EABL has surged 13.6% over the last 4 weeks. It has now lapped its Senator debacle, and anecdotal evidence confirms that the business is strengthening further. Kenya is set to receive a meaningful stimulus from the sharply lower oil price as the commodity has been caught up in the crossfire of a hot geopolitical war and is set to stay lower and for longer than the forward curve that the market expects. Of course, this has negative spillover consequences for our very nascent oil and gas sector, something I, for one, am not convinced that our policymakers have internalized. This also will mark a seismic shift for Africa and its consumer economy in particular, as high flyers like Nigeria and Angola wrestle with a new price norm. The shilling continues to confound expectations. I get asked to comment on the slumping shilling. In response, I always start with, well, actually, it's not slumping. It's doing rather well when you consider that it's facing down a rampant dollar, which is at a more than 4-year high against a basket of currencies. The shilling is at scratch for the year when you add in the carry, that net interest rate differential between the shilling and the dollar, and that's why I call it the Teflon shilling. The performance is even more impressive when you consider the cratering of hard currency tourism and tea receipts. The government of Kenya tapped its record-breaking €2 billion Eurobond issue for another $750 million last month. Who would have believed that Kenya could pull down $2.75 billion from the international capital markets? Of course, we have to put this money to work and earn a return on it. The $2.75 billion number for Kenya is a breakthrough number, whichever way you choose to cut it. I remain of the view that the Eurobond cedes important pricing power to international bondholders. We now have an always-on price on Kenya's credit, and this will positively impact policy making. Any harebrained policy making will mean our credit spread will take an immediate hit. This cause and effect is a good thing, in my view. My friend Hervé Gogo, who is now in Kinshasa but was once in Haiti, and during the earthquake and survived by taking cover under his desk, told me the decision to let the IG of Police David Kimayo and the CS for the Interior go was a no-brainer. Both had rock-bottom ratings with the public, and those ratings were beginning to infect the presidents. In high-stakes politics the world over, that infection is always a signal. The point is that security remains our Achilles heel, as it is in the West and for Nigeria as well. Al Jazeera are putting out a documentary today which has caught a lot of people's attention, and Washington Post and AP ahead of that reported, in Kenya police kill suspects with near impunity. Dr. Eric Thua, a forensic specialist at the Independent Medico-Legal Unit, a Kenya human rights organization, studied gunshot-related deaths in 6 major urban centers between 2009 and 2014. By examining post-mortem records, he found 1,873 gun deaths. Police were involved in nearly 2/3 of them, many of them suspected assassinations. Illegal killings are the norm rather than the exception, Thua wrote in his report. Kenya shilling is around the 90.30 level. The Nairobi all shares at a record high, up 21.844% this year. NSE 20 bounced 0.29% on Friday, but it significantly lagged the all share because of the outperformance of the big cap stocks like Safaricom and EABL. Safaricom has served up a total return of 40.787% year to date. Have a look at that interview I did with Bob straight after the results. And on Saturday, I went to the Capture Kenya Unexpected Kenya launch. This is the calendar that the Safaricom sponsor. And I liked this photograph I'm putting up, and I liked Bob's comment when he said Kenya is made up by the people and not the landscapes. Once again, thank you for stopping by.